Oh, well, not to worry.
But it's
all right.
1 o'clock. It's 1 o'clock in the morning here, so I might not last the session.
Oh, well, good on you for making it. Well done. Where are you?
In France.
Oh, in France. Oh, how nice. Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, in that case, I think that we'll just get started. We're talking about pressure release today. So, you know, it's one of those things that we use it all the time in training, and negative reinforcement, which is what pressure release is, has got a rather bad name, mostly because it's called negative reinforcement and people think it's bad because it's called negative reinforcement. But really all it means is removing something. So positive reinforcement is adding something, negative reinforcement is removing something. Now, the thing is that we all use negative reinforcement with horse training. And if you hear somebody say, I only use positive reinforcement, just ask them, you know, do you put a head collar on the horse? Do you ride the horse? And if the answer is yes to either of those questions, then they do use negative reinforcement. They're just not aware that they're doing it. Now, it depends on the species of animal that we're working with. Positive reinforcement, certainly in the form of food, works better for some species than others. Dogs, for example, are very motivated by food. You know, I've got a Doberman that, you know, he will pull me all over the beach on the lead. So negative reinforcement is really neither here nor there with him. But if I offer him a treat, he will do almost anything, turn himself inside out for a treat this big. And that's great. It's really motivating for him. If I do the same thing to an anxious horse and try to lead the horse in a bridle, for example, using pressure release, the horse is usually very compliant with that. Whereas if I offer the horse a bit of carrot, if the horse is already anxious, I may or may not get any response from that at all. What I do find with horses is that food as a positive reinforcement doesn't always work when the horse is anxious. So trying to get a horse onto a trailer, for example, using food, if the horse is very anxious, it's just not going to work and it's going to be quite confusing. But that, you know, that isn't the only form of positive reinforcement that we use. And horse training is always a mixture of positive and negative reinforcement. So positive reinforcement, and I've drawn the diagram up here. So positive reinforcement and positive punishment, negative reinforcement and negative punishment. Now, horse training is usually a mix of these two types of reinforcement. Punishment we'll talk about in a minute. We don't use it much in horse training because it's not very effective. Negative reinforcement we know is pressure release. So you've got your seat pressure, your legs, your hands, a bit pressure. You've got the whip, spurs if you use them, but you've also got your voice, just emotional pressure like your proximity often is pressure as well. Any movement that you have as well. All these things are types of pressure. So we're using negative reinforcement in all of those things. The positive reinforcement that we use with horses that doesn't involve food is simply adding something. So quite often that might be a soft word, a scratch on the wither, grooming, anything like that is adding something. And certainly, you know, when we're riding, and those of you that are going through the course, you know, it's when you get to the canter module and I ask you just to reach your hand down, your inside hand down and scratch the horse on the wither while you hold your rein. And you can actually feel the horse relax. It's a really great feeling. And you can do that with any time you're riding your horse, you know, when it softens up and you feel the horse relax, just reach down, still holding the rein, just give the horse a scratch on the wither. You'll actually feel like and it's a beautiful form of positive reinforcement and one that we use a lot. Now, the reason these two things are used together, and the reason I know that we use them together is because I hear a lot people say, I just use positive reinforcement, because it sounds so nice, doesn't it? It really does sound awfully nice, but it's impossible to do with your horse. And it's also really hard just to use negative reinforcement. And when I did my experiment where I used 100 horses and we used negative reinforcement, And the experiment was, we taught the horses, after teaching 50 of them give to the bear with negative reinforcement, we then got all 100 of them and taught them to back up through a corridor using rein pressure from one rein. Okay, so that was the experiment. That's what they had to learn. And the handler wasn't allowed to use any sort of positive reinforcement at all. So she wasn't allowed to say good boy. She wasn't allowed to touch the horse. She wasn't allowed to pat the horse. She had to stay silent. And it was really, really hard. So next time you're with your horse, just think about when you're using positive reinforcement and when you're using negative reinforcement, because I think that you'll be surprised how much positive reinforcement you use. Even if you just go out to feed the horse. I was just out feeding mine a moment ago, and and I'm saying hello to them and talking to them very cutely and scratching them behind the ears and doing all of that. Didn't use any negative reinforcement at all this morning. But just be aware of it, because it is really quite interesting. Now, I want to talk quickly about this section, which is the punishment section. You can see here written, all reinforcement makes a behavior more likely to occur. So negative reinforcement, when we release the pressure, it makes the behavior more likely to occur. So let's say we're asking the horse to turn right, for example. We might open that right rein and put some pressure on the bit. And when the horse steps to the right, we'll release it. And that's going to make the horse more likely to turn right in the future when we open that right rein. And the same with positive reinforcement. If we scratch the horse on the wither when it relaxes and we feel the horse relax, we give it a scratch, it's going to make the horse more likely to relax in the future. Punishment is anything we do, positive or negative, with the aim of making a behavior less likely to occur in the future. Now, a lot of us think about this, what we might say, oh, I didn't punish the horse, I corrected the horse. But it's actually the same thing. But often we think, if you tap the horse with the whip, for example, let's say we're asking the horse to stand still and the horse walks forward. We might tap the horse on the cannon bone with the whip and get it to step back, okay? So steps forward again, we tap it and it steps back. And then we're getting what we want. The horse is standing still, the horse isn't stepping forward. So tapping it is adding something, so we're in the positive thing. But it's a punishment because we want the horse not to do that in the future. So it's something designed to make the behavior less likely to occur. So when the horse steps forward, we want the horse thinking, oh, I mustn't do that because I'm going to get tapped on the cannon bone for doing that. So the horse doesn't use that behavior as much in the future. So it makes it a positive punishment. A lot of people will look at that and say, oh, you're just tapping the horse, so it's a correction, it's not a punishment. But this is what divides whether it's a punishment or a reinforcement, right? So correction and punishment are the same thing. They're both in here. And what it often depends on is your idea of severity. So if I was to pick up a big stick and whack the horse on the leg, people would call that a punishment, whereas if I tap the horse, they might call it a correction. So you've got this sort of continuum. The problem is it makes no difference, really, because what for me might be, really harsh might be nothing for you, or vice versa. So it's really important, I think, that we're clear on whether or not we're trying to make the behavior more likely to occur or less likely to occur. And if you're trying to make it less likely to occur, just ask yourself, might there be a better way of doing this? And we know that these don't work as well. Punishments don't work as well as reinforcers. So we know this. So if you find yourself in a situation where you are doing something that is designed to make the behavior less likely to occur, ask yourself that question. Maybe there's a way I could do this, that I could use reinforcement instead of punishment, because it's likely to be more effective in the long term. There are times when you have to use punishment. There just are. Sometimes you're going to find yourself in a situation where you have no choice but to use punishment. The horse jumps in front of the car or something like that. You're just going to have to do that. But as a general rule, if you ask yourself that question when you're training, am I trying to make this behavior less likely to occur, then you are using punishment, and try and turn that around. So if we use the example of we're trying to get the horse to stand still, and it steps forward and we tap it to step it back, you know, might there be a way that we could use reinforcement instead of punishment in that situation? And I would say there would be. I think we need to think about working more with the horse. So the horse obviously wants to walk forward. So why don't you then get the horse to walk forward, but perhaps practice your shoulder control or your give to the bit work, and then offer the horse the opportunity to stand still. Praise the horse for standing still. As soon as it steps forward, say, oh, okay, you want to walk, let's walk. Practice something you want to do, want the horse to know, and then offer it another opportunity to stand still. And eventually the horse is going to learn this. Eventually the horse is going to say, oh, hang on a minute. If I just stand there and don't move, I don't have to work. And the horse will take that opportunity, and you will have taught the horse to stand still without clashing with the horse, you know, without having to correct the horse. And so, you know, that's a really big bonus. We'll talk about that later when we start talking about the order of the cues. So that was the first thing I wanted to talk about. Now, the next thing is the question I often get asked is, how much pressure do I need? And so let's take give to the bit, for example, because most of us have been working some give to the bit. And really, it's going to depend on your horse's history. So the horse that's never had a bridle on, never had a bit in its mouth, you go to pick up pressure on that, and the horse is going to start looking for answers. It's going to move its head in all different directions. It's your job to release when it's correct. If you've got a horse, on the other hand, that's had a lot of that sort of pressure on its mouth, so a horse that perhaps has been an ex-race horse, or a horse that's been ridden by beginners, a horse that's a schoolmaster, a dressage horse, any of those things, it's going to have been habituated or desensitized to a great deal of pressure. And so there we need to find where that horse's level is. What has that horse been desensitized to? So let's have a look at this. We'll take our dressage schoolmaster. Now, the dressage schoolmaster, they're often ridden around with a lot of meaningless pressure. You just need to look at the photographs on Facebook, you know, to see these horses being held really quite tight all the time. And then quite often they're in double bridles, they've got tight nosebands on. There's a lot of pressure here, which means nothing to the horse. So let's say then the horse has been desensitized to this much pressure, whatever that might be. It might be 10 kilograms. It's probably more with the dressage schoolmaster, but let's say it's 10 kilograms, all right? The horse doesn't care about 10 kilograms. So when we come along and retrain that horse, our job is to find what the horse does care about, just initially. Okay. So let's say the horse is fine with these 10 kilograms of pressure. We're going to have to pick up just a little bit more, just a little bit more. So let's say we pick up the first time 11. You know, we just say, okay, what about this? Do you care about this? The horse is going to say, actually, I do care about that because I'm not desensitized to that. That's actually, you know, quite nasty. And so the horse will try and look for an answer to that. The answer is to come off that pressure and relax. And you're going to release it. The horse goes, whoa, hang on a minute. All that pressure went away. This is cool. And so the horse then starts to engage with you. Now we start to get that bubble of communication going because you're no longer working in this zone here. It's really easy in that zone there for the horse just to slide into learned helplessness, because if the pressure never goes away, then there's no reason for the horse to engage with learning, because the horse, there's nothing in it for the horse. When we suddenly say, oh, hang on, if you respond to this and relax and give to that pressure, I'm going to release all of it. The horse goes, hey, okay, now I will engage. Now you're talking. Now I've got some control over this situation. So you do that the first time, and then the next time you're not going to have to pick up as much because the horse is going to get this. The horse is going to go, oh, okay, I'm learning this pattern here. She picks up, I move something, she gives it back. We're all good. I can do this. And pretty quickly, you start working your way down like this. You got a smart horse. He's thinking, oh, hang on a minute. And the horse really learns that pattern. And so before you know it, you go to pick up pressure and the horse goes, oh, yep, I can do that, gives the bit. And then it's, you know, you're down to here and it's basically an automatic response. And that's where you get to quite quickly if your release is good. This is pressure release. The release is really important. And quite quickly it becomes an automatic response. So you get on the horse, you go to pick up your reins, the horse drops into frame, you've got that lovely bubble of communication, off you go. So then what happens when you want to teach the horse something new? So let's say this is your give to the bit. You've got down to here, which is just really like just taking the weight out of the rein for the horse is responding. You're all happy with that. And then you're going to teach shoulder control. Okay. And what's going to happen is the horse is going to respond to this because this has become an automatic response. Now then you're going to need more. So you're going to need to go up here again and say, I'm asking something else now. The pressure is slightly different. The rein's at a different angle. This, you know, how are you going to respond to this? And because your horse has already been through this give to the bit and it's been learning this pattern, this is the pattern, it's so important, look for an answer, the horse will just start looking for an answer. And now we're really dealing with movement. So now we're looking for that reverse arc step where the horse is stepping across in front and you can concentrate your release on getting a bit of that step. So quite quickly the horse goes, oh, you're talking to my left front foot. I can do that. And, you know, the pressure required goes through the same pattern and becomes an automatic response again. Okay. So what happens along this way is that every time you introduce something new to the horse, you're going to have to start by increasing your pressure to something the horse cares about. It'll probably never go back up here, yeah, but it will increase every time. So behind quarters, you know, you're gonna have to increase it till you get the horse to respond so that you can release it. And that's the pattern that we're looking for. And by the time you get to sort of teaching something like flying changes, the horse gets a new pressure. Is, oh gosh, I've never felt this before. Let's look for an answer. You know, and that's why horses that, if we look at this simple little lessons like hips to the fence for mounting, you know, it's a great little lesson. If it's the first lesson you ever teach your horse, it can take you 10 or 15 minutes. If your horse has already done some work, some give to the bit, some shoulder control, maybe at long lines, then you teach it, it's going to take you about 3 minutes. Because the horse knows these patterns. The horse knows, okay, pressure, I feel pressure, it's the whip tapping on my hip. I've got to find an answer. I've got to move something until I move the right thing, and then I know it's going to be released. So the first time that horse steps left, you release, the horse goes, aha, it's the left hind, I know this, and it's really fast. And then as long as our release is good, the horses are just great at this. Of course, you know, every time we release, we also use positive reinforcement. Yeah, we praise the horse. So it gets this double whammy of one, release of all the pressure, and two, it gets that scratch, that reward, that kind word, that stroke, whatever else it is. And so that really helps. And I think the thing to remember with this is we're always working at reducing the pressure. Always working at reducing the pressure. This is what we're aiming for, regardless of where we start. Where we start is really pretty irrelevant because it depends on your horse's history and quite often on your horse's breed as well. Like I find that a warm blood horse, for example, would be, if you're starting that horse yourself and it's never had a bridle in its mouth, you know, you probably need to start about here. Whereas some quarter horses, probably up here somewhere. They're not as interested, they're not as concerned about that. So the more emotional, naturally emotional your horse is, the more likely it is you're going to just start with a small amount of pressure. So Susan, your horse is a the Jinx and D, aren't they? So, you know, it's really interesting when people have two really different horses. Like D is really emotional.
I've lost you.
Is that right?
I can't hear you anymore.
Oh, I don't know. Can you hear me? Can everyone else hear me? Libby, can you hear me? Okay, all right.
Yeah. I can hear you.
Good.
That's Juliet.
Oh, good. Anyway, so it is really interesting to have, you know, two different horses,
Susan's
because
got a sign
you're
on
doing
her
the same thing and one's responding and one's not. And, you know, you might need this much pressure for one, just a tiny bit of pressure for another. But all the same, you're still always working on reducing that pressure. I think this is one of the major problems that if you look at modern dressage, but they've forgotten this. They've forgotten that we're trying to reduce pressure. And usually it works in the opposite direction, because what they're actually doing is increasing the pressure all the time. So, you know, if you go along with what they call a good contact in dressage, so let's say you've got a nice young horse and it's responding quite well to that much pressure, then you're told that you need to keep a good contact. Okay, well, next week you're going to have to increase that a bit because your horse desensitized to that amount. So your horse stopped responding to that amount because it never went away. So you just pick up a little bit more and now you can hold this much. Next week, same problem. Horse is desensitized to that. It's going to stop responding to that. So now you have to pick up a bit more. And we go along like this until you go, oh gosh, now the horse, you know, I need this much pressure. I know, I'll put on a noseband and tighten that up, and that'll cause it a bit more pain, discomfort. So I'll need maybe a bit less. But this is basically the way you're heading in the opposite direction of really where you want to head. So this is the opposite of self-carriage. What we're trying to build is the horse to carry itself, you know, the horse to maintain. And we're talking about bit pressure at the moment, but it's the same for legs. You know, and you hear that a lot in modern dressage, wrap your legs around the horse. Well, you've got the same problem, because you wrap your legs around the horse here and the pressure doesn't go away. So you need more leg, then you need spurs. It keeps going up, and it is the opposite of self-carriage. So we need to always be thinking about that. This is the wrong way around. We need it to go the other way around. We've been talking.
So I got you.
Sorry?
I can now hear you. I don't know what you were talking about, Jinx and D, but.
Yeah. So really opposite horses. So it just makes it really interesting for you having the two different horses. One thing we've been talking about a lot this week is long reining and the pressure required, where to stand, keep the horse moving forward. And we've also been talking about the round pen. So I think that's really worth discussing, because we often, when we think about pressure, we only think about bit pressure or leg pressure. We don't think enough about our emotional pressure or our proximity to the horse. And depending on the horse's history, that can be really quite important. I've done a lot of work with brumbies, for example. Now, you put a brumbie in a round pen, and just looking at it is pressure. So, you know, if I look at it, it moves away from me. So let's have the horse here. Excuse my really good drawing. Now, if I'm here and I have my focus behind the horse, that will move the horse forward. Okay, so a brumbie, for example, an untouched horse is going to move forward quite fast from that. If I then start to walk, as a lot of us do even without thinking about it, if I then start to walk behind the horse, he's going to feel chased. Okay, so that's one extreme. The other extreme is the horse that's been chased around in the round pen a lot. So it's got the old pressure thing, you know, doesn't really care about being chased around in the round pen. And you're going to have to get quite close to that horse, probably with your lunge whip or your lariat, and really move it forward. So that's the other extreme. Now, there's a happy medium in there somewhere where we get a horse that isn't so desensitized to pressure that we have to chase it, the horse that is actually in self-carriage and is moving forward from a go forward cue. Okay, so if we're long reining the horse, then our rein is attached to the head, but our focus and our whip are behind the horse to move it forward. So it's important there that you don't move too far from your circle. And a couple of the videos I've had in this week show people working way too hard with long reining. Yeah, so they're walking too much. And if you get a horse that's nervous or anxious horse and you start walking behind it, that horse is going to feel chased. So it's quite important that you restrict your movement. You learn to do this. The other advantage of you not moving too far is that you're teaching self-carriage. Rather than getting the horse to rely on you to move it forward all the time. So if you can draw yourself a circle about 2 meters wide in the snow or the sand, and try and stay in that, and try and think about you standing still and the horse doing the work. That's the way I always think about it, And if I can stay focused behind the horse, then, and I've got the whip, and I lift the whip when the horse needs encouragement, and I lower it when the horse is fine. But keep your rein short enough so that you don't have to have big loops. And then once you get a big loop in your rein, when you're long reining, it takes quite a lot to pick that up. And then, you've sort of lost it a bit there. If you can have your reins a little bit shorter, then you can still give by moving your hands forward, but you don't have quite so much to recoup when the horse makes the circle smaller or something. So I think it's very important, especially in the round pen. I don't know if any of you have been doing some round pen work at Liberty yet, but I think it's the hardest thing to do is not to chase the horse in the round pen. It's really, really easy to chase the horse in the round pen. That's why I don't use it much at Liberty anymore. It's useful for a few things. Somebody was using it this week to teach the horse outside turns, which was really going to help with reverse arc on the ground, just to get the horse to move out of your space. But otherwise, I find it so easy to chase the horse in the round pen that I really don't have much use for it. So do be careful with that. So if you are in the round pen and you're finding yourself outside of this sort of circle, be careful, because you're probably chasing the horse. And it might be that the horse is lazy and therefore needs chasing, but then all you're doing is desensitizing your horse to the go forward cue, okay, which is where we'll go now, onto the go forward cue. So again, the go forward cue is a pressure thing. And another thing that we always use, I try and have 3 cues at least. The first one is a verbal cue. Your voice is pressure. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And I think we forget that. And I think it's important that we remember that it's pressure, because we want the horse to respond from the lightest pressure cue. So I always use that first. And I know people say, oh, well, I can't do that because I ride dressage, and, the dressage, I'll lose marks in dressage. Well, they're mostly pretty deaf, those old judges, and nobody's going to hear you go like this or like this, or good boy. Nobody's going to hear that, and nobody's going to care either. I do remember once, a couple of years ago, I'd been teaching this girl. She'd never done any dressage before in the past, and she was terribly excited, and she was going into her first ever competition. And I went along to watch her, and I was standing up the end of the arena, just next to the judge's car, and she's coming up and she's doing her canter circle right up by the judge there at C. And she's going, oh, good boy, fantastic, oh, well done. And she's so sweet. Anyway, she came out and she said, oh, was that great? I said, well, you shouldn't really talk. You're going to lose points for that. And she said, you told me that I should always praise him like that. And I was like, whoops, I forgot. Not in the test. Not in the test. Just do it under your breath. Anyway, she didn't lose any points because it was so gorgeous. So what we don't want the horse to desensitize to those first cues. So let's say we're on the ground, we're doing give to the bit, for example. My first cue for walk forward will be a cluck. My second cue will be to raise the whip. My third cue will be to tap with the whip. So I've got 3 cues. The horse learns that pattern really fast. And when I'm riding and I'm walking and I want the horse to trot, I'm going to cluck, and then I'm going to touch the horse with my leg, and then I'm going to squeeze the horse with my leg, and then I've got the whip. So again, I want the horse to be responding from that cluck. So I'll keep clucking until I get the trot. So I'll keep each of those cues and I'll just add another cue to it. So I'll cluck, I'll touch with my leg, I'll squeeze with my leg, I'll tap with the whip. We've got all 4 cues going. And when the horse trots, I release everything. And the horse will learn that pattern. If I leave a second between each cue, pretty quickly the horse is responding when I squeeze, then the horse is responding when I touch, and the horse is responding when I cluck. So my pressure cues are getting lighter and lighter. It's important with that verbal cue that we don't overuse it. Yeah, so it's, if you be aware, I see people in the round pen and lunging, long reining a lot, clucking to their horse the whole time. I'm like, well, the horse is already trotting. So if you want the horse to trot faster, then cluck, make it trot faster, then be quiet. Because otherwise you're desensitizing your horse to the verbal cue, and you're also making the horse rely on you to keep going. So the horse will just, as soon as you stop clucking, the horse will come back to walk. And so that's the opposite of self-carriage, right? You know, so don't waste that verbal cue, because I think that verbal cue is very important. And don't feel just because you're going to ride dressage tests that you can't use it, because of course you can. Yeah, it's the lightest possible cue. It's the best one to train towards. You know, you always want your horse to respond to that. It's like the stop cue. So if you're teaching stop from the ground, your first thing is going to be say whoa, or whatever verbal cue you want your horse to stop from. You say whoa, and then you stop walking. So that's your physical cue, and then you pick up pressure. That's your pressure cue. So the pressure cue is the hardest one. Or the most severe cue. And so we don't want to have to pick up pressure on the horse. We really want the horse to stop when we say whoa. To be aware that, you know, I was watching somebody long rein their horse the other day, and it's cantering, and they said whoa, and I said, and it came back to trot. And I said, well, hang on, what did you want? You know, did you want the horse to trot, or did you want the horse to stop? Because it's important that you actually get the horse to do what you asked it to do. So if a horse is cantering, you say, whoa, get it to stop. Release when it stops, not when it trots. If you want it to trot, my downward transition is always and trot and walk. And then I have the clucks or the kisses to go up. But whoa is always whoa. So whenever the horse hears whoa, it stops, you know, all 4 feet stop. And I think it's important, if you want to maintain self-carriage in your upward and downward transitions, that you don't overuse that, and that you get it right, you know, you get it correct, which is another reason why your voice pressure cue needs to be consistent. So I use 1 cluck for walk. If I want the horse to walk faster, I use 1 cluck. I use 2 or more for trot. If I want the horse to trot faster, I use 2 or more clucks. And that kiss for canter. Canter faster, 1 kiss, or many kisses, but just not clucks. You know, I see it a lot, like people that say, oh, I can't get my walk to canter transition. And so you look at them and say, okay, well, what's your cue? And they go like this, and squeeze of the leg, and, you know, all this stuff. And I say, okay, what's your cue for trot faster? Squeeze of the leg. Okay, let's just teach the kiss. Get off the horse, we'll teach the kiss to canter cue, and then get back on the horse and we'll see what happens. And the horse goes, oh yeah, okay, I get that. That's easy. You know, you cue canter, you didn't cue faster. So it's very important that we do teach the horse easy to distinguish cues so that they don't get confused. Because I think horses, you know, you do get some pretty bad behavior when the horse gets confused. Whereas if you make yourself very clear, most horses are pretty happy to oblige with that. So that's it really from me on pressure release today. And I will open it up to questions from you.
Kate, when you say do a double cluck for a horse trot, do you also say trot? as well. So he understands when you're coming down, when you say, and you're cantering and you say, and tarot.
Yeah, I probably use both. I'm just really careful to keep the clucking to the upward transition.
Yeah.
I haven't found that clucking for a downward transition works.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But would you, when you're going upwards, would you say clack, clack, trot?
Yeah, I probably don't use the word much. No. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm sure I do. I've tried to follow your clucking and kissing system. And I'm still getting a bit muddled.
Oh, Juliet, I wouldn't fuss about that. I mean, I think, you know, it doesn't matter what your cue is as long as you're consistent. And if, you know, go trot, 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 you know, I use trot, trot quite a bit.
Well, yeah, I've always used clucking. So to try and use something else, because yes, I do understand that clucking can mean go faster, can mean, well, it can mean anything for going faster to the horse. So as I say, I'm trying to make it a difference when I want a different pace.
Yes, well, I think then if you keep the clucking go faster to the trot and you kiss to go faster in the canter, then I think that's, you know, I think you're set there.
I'm getting there. I just have to remember.
I think you're fine there. I mean, I think as long as you're consistent and as long as it's clear to the horse that you're cueing, you know, some people have a speed up cue. Hup, hup, is the English use that a bit, Juliet? You know, hup, hup, and it might mean speed up in trot, it might mean speed up in canter. It just means move your feet faster. And I think that's great. That's a great way of doing it. And it's very easy for the horse to distinguish between hup and, like, you know, it's a very different sound. So I think whatever your cue is, as long as you're consistent with that and it's clear to the horse, then I think you're absolutely fine.
Right. Okay. Yeah. But be consistent. Yes.
Yeah. That's it, isn't it? That's it. Be consistent. Yeah.
Yeah.
And be aware of
when you just, as you explained, people use clucking all the time. I've used clucking myself all the time. Go a bit faster. Cluck, cluck. Come on. And I actually don't want him to do a transition. I just want him to go a bit faster in whatever he's doing.
Yeah, see, yeah, I think that's when you run into problems, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm having to retrain myself.
Yeah, and you might think about having that hup cue as a speed up cue. I remember when I first went to Colorado, and you know, I'm sitting there and watching this cowboy, Josh Lyons, in the round pen, and his cue for movement was a kiss. So honestly, like 8 hours watching this cowboy go. And it meant everything to him, you know. It's like move anything, look at me, canter, trot, come to me. It just meant movement, and the horse understood that very well, and he was very consistent with that. It looked quite funny from my point of view, but yeah, as long as you're consistent and you know what it means, and it's easy to for the horse to tell the difference between that and something else, I think you're set. But you're quite right. Yeah, it's about retraining ourselves much more than the horses.
I have a question about praise, in use of praise. Under saddle, I sometimes feel like I'm almost using it too much and it might become meaningless. So I guess two questions, like how do you apply it so it's not like sort of white noise, like, you know, saying good all the time for the small, and does it have to be linked to food or a scratch to be meaningful?
Yeah, it's really good questions, Libby. I think that it's a funny thing because having worked a lot with Brumbies, if you praise them, it has exactly the opposite effect, because it might be scary enough standing in the round pen with you looking at them. You then talk and they're like, oh my God, you know, it's so much worse. So they're interesting to have worked with them because you do in fact have to pair it. You have to, like clicker training, like teaching a horse to clicker train. You don't have to pair it with food. I don't think you ever need to necessarily pair anything with food, because as we discussed earlier, I just don't think horses are that motivated by food. You know, I mean, dogs in the wild might eat once a week. Horses graze for 16 hours a day. You know, so you're offering them another bit of salad for what? You know, they're like, you know, it's just not motivating. So, you know, I think if you can pair it with a scratch, that's probably your best option. And again, you know, with the Brumbies, you can't touch them yet. So until you can touch them, until they work out scratching is good, it's very hard to use your voice. So yeah, I do think that it is something with a lot of horses that has to be taught. Again, you know, they've found that patting your horse like that horses hate that. And they have shown that when they've looked at heart rates and things, they've shown that it's a really bad thing to do with a horse. So that's not going to work. But a scratch or a stroke, they do really seem to enjoy, especially around that wither area. So and on their necks, which are the places where the mares touch the foals. And it's the places horses groom each other. So that they've found very rewarding. They've also found the scratching on the wither actually lowers the heart rate. So that's fairly unusual for them to find things like that. So that was a really interesting experiment. And that's why it's easy when you're riding just to reach down with your inside hand, still on the rein, and give the horse a scratch. And when you start doing that, I find it especially in the canter, because some people get a little bit more anxious about the canter. And so by just reaching down, it, you know, loosens the rein, it releases that pressure, and it helps the people just breathe out. And you'll feel the horse do it too. You really will feel that horse go, oh, right, okay, I'm doing the right thing. We're okay. Yeah, but I do think with a lot of horses, it's reinforcement is something that they need to learn in that way. Yeah. Did I finish answering your question?
Yeah, I think, yeah, the first bit was, can you use praise too much?
Oh, yeah. Oh, good question. Good question. Absolutely. Absolutely. You can desensitize your horse to praise in the same way as you can desensitize your horse to any form of pressure. It's basically, you know, you're desensitizing your horse to voice. And I think it's, again, you know, it's something that's easier to see with dogs perhaps. Because you know, our kids even, you know, if you keep telling your child that they're great and that they did that really well and everything, well, eventually it means absolutely nothing to them, does it? So I do think that you need to be aware of your voice all the time with your horse. So whether you're using it as pressure, you know, to ask your horse to, you know, upward transition or to go faster, in the same way as you do if you're using it as a reward. Be aware of when you're using it, because any form of pressure that you use, your horse will desensitize to if it's not used for a specific purpose. And that's a really common one too. It's as common, you know, we just look at people working, oh, good boy, oh, well done, good boy. You know, it's more helpful for us if you find yourself doing that, sing a song or something. And maybe just try for a while to associate it with a touch cue, like patting the horse or something. It'll make you more aware of when you're doing it. So every time you want to say good boy, make yourself scratch the horse on the wither, and you'll be much more aware of actually whether you do want to praise the horse or not. Or you...
So what you're saying, Kate, also is you need cues for good boy, because I have to confess, I talk to my horses all the time. When I'm grooming them, I'm talking to them.
Yeah.
Not saying they're a good boy or anything, but just, oh, is that nice? Oh, that's a bit dirty, you know, let's have a good bit at that. And I'm talking to them all the time.
I think that's lovely, Juliet, and so do I, you know, so do I. But that's why it's probably better to, you know, couple it with a physical cue where you actually touch the horse. Yeah, I'm with you. I talk to them the whole time. They're very bored with me.
Yeah, I think people think I'm mad, but you know, I seem to have very good conversations with them. I'm not sure they understand everything, but it's very good for me to tell them things.
Yeah, I think all our horses know much more than they should.
Kate?
Yes.
With, when you want to increase the pressure in, say, something like give to the bit, would you increase the speed at which you're tapping or the intensity of the tapping?
Well, it depends on whether you're trying to increase the horse's emotional level or increase the pressure. I mean, if you want to increase the horse's emotional level, use those two examples you said. You could increase the speed or you could increase the severity. But if you're teaching give to the bit, assuming that your horse is in the bubble and your emotional level is right, then you're probably looking at just an increase in the pressure if your horse isn't responding to the pressure.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant hips to the fence. I probably said give to the bit, but I meant hips to the fence.
You meant hips to the fence. Yeah, yeah. Perfect example then. Yeah, perfect example. Yes, I would probably go for an increase in intensity over speed with that particular lesson, because you want the horse to respond. Otherwise, you know, the horse, it's a little bit boxed in that lesson because you're by the fence and you're standing like quite close to in front of the horse. They can get quite frustrated. So you're much better off getting the horse to step somewhere. Its choices are really limited. You know, it can't go many places when you're holding it quite close to the bit there. So it's unlikely to make many mistakes. But you're much better off getting some movement and getting that first release. Because as soon as you get that first release, it's, oh, step left, sure, I can do that. and over it goes. So yeah, I think that I'd definitely use intensity there.
Okay.
I think, you know, again, this comes back a little bit to what we've discussed recently, which was about treating pressure as if it's a cumulative thing. So rather than hitting the horse or tapping the horse 10 times really gently, you're better off tapping it a bit harder once and getting a response, because the 10 times really gently is much more likely to frustrate the horse. Than tapping it once, getting some movement and being able to reward that. And then what happens, because if your horse, if we're here, and let's say we're teaching hips to the fence, and this is a horse that, you know, has been, you know, the whip's been used quite harshly, the horse doesn't really care about the whip, and this is what the horse has been desensitized to. Okay, so you come along and you start here with a nice sort of gentle tap. And the horse goes, you don't care about that. So you increase that. Yeah, and again, you still haven't reached this point. You keep increasing it. And now, even though you're higher than the horse was before, you've desensitized the horse to this much now. Yeah, because you've been slowly getting more and more and more, and the horse has still been standing there. So you're actually working up instead of down. Yeah. So what we need to do is work out quickly what that level is. What's the horse been desensitized to? The first time we need to add a bit more. Okay. This is going to get the horse thinking, oh, hang on a minute, I don't like that much. I'm going to move something. And the horse moves something. And then next time, we can probably come right down to here, because you can usually, by about, if you have a horse that's done, you know, a lot of pressure release work, you know, 3 or 4 times you're raising the whip and the horse is moving to the left. And so you can start going down really fast. But you have to make this jump. You have to do this first. Because this is what the horse has been desensitized to. This is not what you've done unless you've started up here and start working your way progressively up. So I think that's probably what goes wrong with training this particular exercise more often than anything. It's getting that emotional level right. So knowing what this level is to get movement with the horse. Yeah. But it's the same, you know, it's the same thing if you, whatever you're teaching, trailer loading or anything at all, you know, it's finding this is your key to starting, because you've got to get to that level quickly where the horse cares about it, where the horse hasn't been desensitized. You've got, and it's going to differ with every horse, depending on their history, what they've been through before.
And is it going to differ with every exercise?
Probably not, because you're going to have a good handle on that horse. I mean, you know, if you look at your horse D's are sort of out of 100 emotional level wise, she's sort of 65, isn't she? Yeah. So with D, you just know that you need to push her up to a 67, and then you can start coming down, you know. So, you know, she's probably never going to be here, I would say.
Right.
I would say with a horse like that, you know, she's so aware and so sensitive that with her, you can come in here and she'll be responding to that. Whereas your other horse is much less sensitive and probably about a 50 or less even. And, you know, that horse has been desensitizing, so you probably have to start here. But both of them you're going to be working down. It's just your job is easier with D. Might not feel it.
Right. But today I was with Jinx on the working equitation obstacle.
Oh, good.
Things.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, it was great fun, but so she would do everything except the bridge. It didn't seem to matter. Well, maybe I didn't increase the pressure enough. She was not going to step on the bridge. She'll walk into a trailer and out without any problem now,
Yep.
but there was no way to pick up 1 foot.
Okay, yeah, it's probably worth teaching the bridge in the same way as you do the trailer.
Well, that's what I was trying to.
Hmm?
Yeah, but
So I keep losing you. I can't really hear you. But yeah, I mean, I would. Yeah, your sound is not very good. I would try that. Try teaching it in the same way as you would teach the trailer. 1 foot on, 1 foot off, 2 feet on, 2 feet off. It's a good exercise to do anyway. And even you could start it with the tarp on the ground, 1 foot on, 1 foot off, anything like that. And stepping up onto a platform. It's a really nice little exercise to do. Good. All right. Any other questions?